So in a previous video, I talked about backend workflows and how to schedule an API workflow. In this tutorial, we're going to look at how to schedule an API workflow on a list. Okay, now we're getting even more powerful than just a standard backend single API workflow. So the example I'm going to use is basically bulk sending a bunch of users an email, and also how to make sure that we can cancel that. So we can cancel it just in case we don't want it to send. And we'll be saving an ID, basically a scheduled workflow ID, and we'll have a button where we can just, stop that workflow from running altogether. So let's jump in. Okay, so here are my two buttons, schedule emails and cancel emails. But what we'll be doing by emails, I mean that we'll be scheduling a single API workflow, but we'll be running that on a list of users. So let's jump in and have a look at how this is done. So if I click on this button, what we need to do, okay, is custom events, schedule API workflow on a list. And here we have a bit more fields than the standard API workflow because we have to define a list to run on. And this is where things can kind of get a bit confusing for some people exploring this for the first time. What do we want to do here? We have to, and say this out loud, what you want to achieve, because we can schedule things on a list of anything in the database. We can schedule to delete a list of tasks, to update a list of projects. And this is where we define which list, which rows in the database do we want to basically run workflows on. Okay, so we know we want to send emails to users. So naturally, we're looking for users. And which users do we want to target within this specific list? Because we have lots of users. So I'm going to say do a search for. And I'm going to use constraints to define. So let's just say, for instance, that we have users who are on a trial. So trial equals yes. And regardless of where they are on the trial, I'm going to send them an email and say, hey guys, you're on a trial. I hope things are going well. I'd like to extend your trial for another, 14 days. Why not? I'm going to leave this for a second and just come down to schedule date because I don't want to send this now. I could say, let's send it in current date and time plus 7 days. Okay, 7 days from the current time. Or my new favorite date tool, arbitrary date. I can literally say next Monday. Monday at 8 a.m. If I click just to the left, Bubble actually resolves this for us. So Monday, August 2nd at 8 a.m. GMT. Perfect. Now we have to define the API workflow. So this is where we go to the backend. Because for each user that we've defined, each of those users will basically get emailed one by one, working down the list. So we have to set up this backend workflow. Okay, so here it is here. I've just gone and created a API workflow. Gave it a name, has to be all lowercase. And if you need spaces, join it with a dash. Uncheck all of these. And we're feeding through a user. So a user is coming through one by one and they're getting sent an email. That's what's happening here. And basically you can run just a regular workflow from here. And because we set up a parameter, gave the parameter a name, I'm calling it a user because that's what it is. Set up the type user, great. And then we can just access for every user in the list that's passed through to this endpoint. That's the user there, that would be the email address. So basically what we're doing is working down through a list, and Bubble is just running these just one at a time as quickly as possible at the specific scheduled date, okay, which is next Monday at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. And here, you can use SendGrid here or Mailgun or Postmark, whatever people are using these days. It's just a standard email. So this is very simple. Grabbing the user through this parameter, feeding the user into this step. Okay, we can do anything we want here. Any data manipulation. Create stuff, delete a list of things, whatever we like. But because we've set up this API workflow on the back end, and this is just this top one, right? Top one. Because we've done that, we can now select, I've done it twice here. We can now select that the API workflow we're looking for is send emails. So when I click that, remember we set up a parameter on the back end that said a user equals a user data type. Well, here it is here. Here's the name, user. And this might feel a bit foreign to you, okay? I'm going to select this user. It's not the current user, it's a list of users. We're running this as an admin. What does this user mean? It means that if we run a query list here on this list search for users with the constraint trial equals yes, for every result that comes back, feed that particular user, we're calling it this user, through to the backend and send them that email. So you'll always see whenever you schedule an API workflow on a list, Bubble's always going to say this user. Or if it was search for projects, it would say this project. Search for tasks, this task. Okay, you start with a list, and then for each result of that list, you're passing that particular result through to the backend. If this was project related, filter that. If I said that, no, we want to run an API workflow on a list of projects. Okay, so I've changed it on the back end. If I go back to the front end, I'm just going to delete this and show you again. Schedule API workflow on the list. If I say the list to run on, send emails. Okay, remember I changed the parameter to project. Now we see project. Okay, which means I have to define a project. Which projects? Do a search for projects, apply our constraints, whatever those are, and now we'd feed through this project. Okay, let me undo all of that. Just make sure we get back to the default, which should be user. Go back. Basically to how we were. Now the next step, what I've done here is I've created a new event. Okay, I've gone down to just to create a new thing. Event is in my database. Here, all it has is an ID, which is a text field. Although Bubble shows scheduled events as numbers, it has to actually be formatted as text. So I'm going to save the ID of the scheduled workflow. And if I create this by default again, so I'd go create a new thing. That's going to be an event. I have an ID field, and now I can just save the result of step 1. So all I need to do, Bubble knows that you want to save the ID of this workflow that's going to run. So that would be queued up in your log section under scheduler. Okay, it would be queued up there. You'd see the scheduled time, the ID, that's what we're saving. So you could cancel it as an admin from here, but I prefer to build the tools in my dashboard for this. So we'd save that to the database, which means that we can run a workflow to cancel this ID, and then wherever you saved it, whichever row in the database and field you saved it to, well, that's up to you to decide how to get it. But in this instance, I can just do a search for events. I only have one row in the database, so it's the first item's ID. We can also save a list of IDs and also cancel a list of IDs through the same mechanisms. Okay. Well, I hope that was a good introduction. As you can see, very powerful, especially for processing data. We run this all the time using this particular function to process users and all of their data, posts, stuff in the background, running it all the time. It's very stable. So have fun with it and see what you can come up with and see how it can improve the efficiency of your app.